My best friend told everyone at my mother's funeral that I stole the inheritance. I didn't even know there was an inheritance until she had already taken it. My best friend stood up at my mother's funeral, in the middle of the reception, in front of 60 people who had just watched me bury the woman who raised me, and told the room I'd stolen my mother's inheritance. She said it calmly. She said it like she was doing everyone a favor. She said it with that voice she uses when she wants people to think she's the reasonable one in the room, the one who hates drama but just had to say something because someone needs to. She looked me dead in the eyes while she did it. And 60 people, family, neighbors, my mother's church friends, people who'd known me since I was in diapers, turned to look at me like I was a stranger they'd just caught with blood on her hands. That was 9 months ago. I still can't drive past the funeral home without pulling over to throw up. Her name is Valerie. Valerie Simmons. And she was my best friend for 16 years. Was. I need to use that word now because whatever Valerie is to me at this point, friend isn't it? She's something else entirely, something I don't think the English language has a clean word for. The person who knew you best and used it to destroy you. The person who was close enough to find every soft spot and sharp enough to press on every one of them at the exact moment you couldn't defend yourself. There should be a word for that. There isn't. So I just call her Valerie, and the name itself has become the word. I need to get this out. All of it. The whole story. Because the version that's been circulating, the version Valerie built and distributed like a press release to anyone who would listen, is not what happened. And I've been too broken, too exhausted, too deep in grief to correct it until now. My mother is dead. My reputation in my hometown is shredded. Half my family won't return my calls. And the woman who did all of it is living 3 miles from my mother's empty house, spending money that was never hers, and posting Bible verses on Facebook like God is her personal brand manager. Let me start where it actually starts. Not with a funeral. With my mother. Because you need to know who she was before you can understand what was taken from her and from me. My mother's name was Diane Holloway. She lived her entire life in Hendersonville, Tennessee, a small city just north of Nashville where everybody knows everybody and gossip moves faster than the internet. She was a school librarian for 31 years. She drove the same silver Buick for 19 of them. She went to First Baptist every Sunday, taught Sunday school to kindergartners, and made a peach cobbler so good the church put it in their annual cookbook twice. She was quiet, deliberate, private about money in the way Southern women of her generation were, never flashy, never talked about what she had or didn't have. She wore the same pearl earrings for 40 years. She mowed her own lawn until she was 68. She was not the kind of woman you'd look at and think inheritance. She was the kind of woman you'd look at and think backbone. My father died when I was 11. Heart attack, sudden, gone before the ambulance arrived. After that, it was just me and Mom. I'm an only child. No siblings, no cousins close enough to count. Mom and I became a unit, tighter than most mothers and daughters, probably too tight in the ways therapists warn about, but I didn't care. She was my person. She helped me with homework at the kitchen table every night until I graduated. She drove me to college move-in day at UT Knoxville and cried the whole way home, I know because she called me from the driveway and I could hear the engine still running. She called me every single evening at 7 p.m. for 22 years. Every single evening. Even when I lived in Nashville after college. Even when I got married. Even when I had my daughter, Grace. 7 o'clock, the phone would ring and it was Mom, asking about my day like it was the most important question in the world. She got sick 2 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. The kind that doesn't negotiate. The doctor said 6 to 12 months. She got 14, because she was Diane Holloway and she wasn't leaving until she was good and ready. I moved back to Hendersonville to take care of her, left my apartment in Nashville, pulled Grace out of her school, rearranged my entire life around a hospital bed in my mother's living room. My husband, Cole, stayed in Nashville for work but drove up every weekend. For 14 months, I bathed my mother, changed her sheets, administered her medication, held her hand through pain that made her scream into a pillow, and sat with her at 3 a.m. when the morphine wasn't enough and all she wanted was for someone to talk to her until it passed. That's who I was. A daughter. Taking care of her dying mother. While Valerie was taking care of everything else. I met Valerie when I was 20 years old. She was dating a guy in my friend group at UT Knoxville, and we bonded at a tailgate over a shared hatred of a particular professor and a shared love of terrible reality TV. She was charming, everyone says that about her, and it's true. Valerie had this gift for making you feel like you were the most important person in the room. She remembered details. She followed up. She'd text you something specific, how did that job interview go? Or did your car pass inspection? And it made you feel seen in a way that's rare and addictive. I attached to her quickly. Too quickly, looking back. But when you're 20 and lonely and far from home, a person who pays attention to you feels like a lifeline. We stayed close after college. She moved to Hendersonville too, partly because rent was cheaper than Nashville, partly because she liked the town, and partly, she said, because she wanted to be near me. She got a job doing bookkeeping for a local construction company. She was good with numbers, good with paperwork, good with the tedious back-end stuff that most people hate. She and my mother got along immediately. Mom loved her. Called her my other daughter. Invited her to Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter. Valerie brought flowers every time. She helped Mom in the garden. She sat on the porch and listened to Mom's stories about Dad, about the old days, about the Hendersonville that existed before the Nashville sprawl crept north. Mom trusted her. I trusted her. We both let her in so deep that by the time she betrayed us, she was already inside every wall we had. When Mom got sick, Valerie stepped up. Or so I thought. She offered to help with the practical stuff, the bills, the insurance paperwork, the things I didn't have the bandwidth for while I was spending 18 hours a day in caregiver mode. She had the bookkeeping background. She understood forms and accounts and the bureaucratic maze that terminal illness drops you into. I was grateful. God, I was so grateful. I handed her my mother's financial paperwork without a second thought. Bank statements. Insurance documents. The contact information for Mom's attorney. Access to Mom's account so she could pay the home health aide and the pharmacy and the medical equipment company. I gave her everything because I was drowning in bedpans and morphine schedules and the slow, excruciating work of watching my mother die, and Valerie said, "Let me carry this for you," and I let her. I let her because that's what trust is. You hand someone the heavy thing and you believe they'll hold it. Here's what I didn't know. My mother had money. Not a fortune, not millions, not some secret empire, but significantly more than I ever imagined. Mom had been quietly, methodically saving and investing for decades. The school librarian who drove a Buick and wore the same earrings for 40 years had, through a combination of careful saving, a paid-off house, a modest pension, Dad's life insurance from 20 years ago, and investments she'd apparently been managing through an advisor since the late 90s, accumulated just over $340,000 in liquid assets. Plus the house, which, given Hendersonville's growth as Nashville pushed north, was worth about $280,000. Total estate, over $600,000. I had no idea. None. My mother never talked about money. She lived like a woman with enough and nothing more. She didn't travel. She didn't renovate. She didn't splurge. The only hint, and I've replayed this 1,000 times, was a conversation we had about 4 months before she died. She was having a good day, sitting up in bed, eating soup. She said, "Megan, I need to talk to you about the house and some other things. Not today. But soon. There are things you need to know," I said, "Okay, Mom. Whenever you're ready." She nodded and changed the subject. We never had that conversation. Her health declined fast after that, and the lucid days became rare, and then they stopped, and she died on a Tuesday in March with my hand on her chest and Amazing Grace playing from a Bluetooth speaker because the hospice nurse said music helps at the end. She died, and I didn't know about the money, and Valerie did. Valerie knew because she'd been inside my mother's financial life for over a year. She'd seen the bank statements. She'd spoken with the attorney. She'd had access to every account, every document, every number. And at some point, I don't know exactly when, my attorney is still working the timeline, she began moving things. Not dramatically. Not in some obvious, movie villain heist. Slowly. Carefully. The same way she did everything, with attention to detail and the kind of patience that only someone truly calculating possesses. She made herself a co-signer on one of Mom's accounts, forged the paperwork, or maybe talked Mom into signing something during a confused, medicated moment, we don't know yet, and the uncertainty haunts me. She redirected some of the investment distributions. She paid herself for services from Mom's account, bookkeeping fees, administrative fees, things that sounded legitimate on paper but were fabricated. Over the course of 14 months, while I was changing my mother's sheets and holding her hand through chemo and sleeping on a cot next to her hospital bed, Valerie siphoned approximately $140,000. $140,000. Almost half of the liquid assets my mother spent a lifetime building. But the money wasn't enough. Because Valerie didn't just steal. She covered. And the cover was worse than the crime. My mother's funeral was on a Saturday. First Baptist, packed. Standing room only because Diane Holloway had touched that many lives in 69 years of quiet, steady kindness. I was in the front row with Cole and Grace, who was 7 and didn't fully understand but knew that Grandma was gone and that Mama couldn't stop crying. The service was beautiful. Pastor Davis spoke about Mom's faithfulness. The choir sang How Great Thou Art. I managed to read a eulogy without collapsing, though my hands shook so badly Cole had to hold the paper for me. The reception was at the church fellowship hall. Casseroles and sweet tea and hugs from people whose names I barely registered because grief had turned my brain to static. I was standing by the dessert table. Someone had made Mom's peach cobbler from the church cookbook, and that detail nearly broke me, when Valerie walked to the center of the room. She didn't tap a glass. She didn't ask for attention. She just started speaking, loud enough that the room went quiet, with that calm, concerned, "I'm only doing this because I care" voice that I now recognize as the most dangerous sound in the world. "I know this isn't the time," she said. "And I'm so sorry to do this here. But I feel like the truth matters, especially when someone we love has passed and can't speak for herself." I looked up. Everyone looked up. Diane asked me to help manage her affairs this past year because she was worried. She told me, and I have the documentation to prove this, that she was concerned about the way her finances were being handled. Money was being moved. Accounts were being accessed. She didn't want to believe it was Megan, but she asked me to keep an eye on things. The room was silent. 60 people. Not a sound. I've spent the last few months documenting what I found. I didn't want to say anything while Diane was alive because I didn't want to cause her more pain. But now that she's gone, I think her family and friends deserve to know that a significant amount of her savings, money she worked her whole life for, was taken. And the only person with access was Megan. She looked at me. And she was crying. Actual tears, rolling down her face, and I'll spend the rest of my life wondering if those tears were real or just the final, masterful touch of a performance she'd been rehearsing for months. I stood there. Cole's hand was on my arm. Grace was pulling at my dress asking for juice. And 60 people were staring at me with expressions that shifted, in real time, from sympathy to suspicion. I watched it happen. I watched faces I'd known my whole life rearrange themselves. Mrs. Patterson from next door. Uncle Hank, my father's brother. The women from Mom's book club. People who had just hugged me, just told me how much they loved Diane, just squeezed my hand and said, "Your mama was so proud of you." They were looking at me like I was something they'd stepped in. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Not a word. Not a denial. Not a defense. Because how do you defend yourself against an accusation you don't even understand, at your mother's funeral, while your 7-year-old is tugging your dress and the peach cobbler is sitting on the table and the world is tilting sideways and you can't breathe? Cole stepped in. He said, "This is not the place. Valerie, this is not the time or the place." His voice was steady, but I could feel his hand shaking on my arm. Valerie nodded, dabbing her eyes. "You're right. I'm sorry. Diane deserved better." And she walked away. Back into the crowd. Where people touched her arm and whispered to her and handed her tissues. Like she was the victim. Like she was the one who'd lost something. I left the reception 12 minutes later. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. I carried Grace to the car, buckled her in, sat in the driver's seat, and pressed my forehead to the steering wheel. I didn't just lose my mother that week. I didn't just lose my reputation. I didn't just lose $140,000 that my mother had saved one careful dollar at a time for 30 years. I lost the ability to grieve in peace. Valerie took that too. She took the funeral. She took the room. She took the sympathy of 60 people and redirected it toward herself, and she left me standing by a peach cobbler with nothing but silence and my daughter's small hand pulling at my dress. That's what she stole that I can never get back. Not the money. The goodbye. It's been 9 months since the funeral. 9 months since Valerie stood in a church fellowship hall and burned my name to the ground in front of everyone I've ever known. People keep saying time helps. People who say that have never had their character assassinated at their mother's funeral by the person who stole what they're being accused of stealing. Time doesn't help with that. Time just puts distance between you and the explosion, but the shrapnel is still in your body, and every time you move, you feel it. The first week after the funeral was a kind of hell I didn't know existed. Not the grief. The grief was expected, enormous, suffocating, but expected. I knew I'd have to learn to live without my mother. What I didn't know was that I'd have to do it while simultaneously defending myself against an accusation so perfectly constructed that it made me look guilty even to people who'd known me since birth. Valerie had prepared. That's the thing that keeps me awake. She didn't just make a speech at the funeral, she'd been laying groundwork for months. While I was changing my mother's sheets and crushing pills into applesauce and holding a bedpan at 4 a.m., Valerie was building a narrative. She'd had quiet conversations with people in town, casual mentions over coffee, concerned whispers at church. "I'm worried about Diane's finances. Megan's been under so much stress, I just hope she's making good decisions. I don't want to say anything, but some things aren't adding up." She planted seeds so carefully that by the time she made her accusation public, half the town already had a version of the story growing in their heads. All she did at the funeral was water it. The phone calls started the day after. Not to me, about me. Uncle Hank called Cole and asked, point blank, if I'd been in Diane's accounts. Mrs. Patterson told another neighbor she was concerned about what she'd heard. Mom's book club held an emergency meeting, without me, to discuss the situation. A woman I'd known my entire life, someone who taught me to ride a bike, someone who brought us casseroles when Dad died, looked at me in the Kroger parking lot 3 days after the funeral and shook her head. Didn't say a word. Just shook her head and walked to her car. That small gesture, that tiny, silent judgment from a woman who'd watched me grow up, hit me harder than anything Valerie said in that fellowship hall. Hendersonville is a small town. Not tiny, but small enough that reputation is currency and gossip is the banking system. Within 2 weeks, the story had mutated and spread into something unrecognizable. The version making rounds wasn't just that I'd mismanaged Mom's finances. It was that I deliberately drained her accounts while she was dying. That I'd moved back to Hendersonville not to care for her but to get closer to the money. That I'd isolated her from friends and family, which was insane because I'd been begging people to visit, begging for help, begging for someone to sit with her for an hour so I could shower. But the truth doesn't travel as fast as a good story, and Valerie had given them an excellent story, the greedy daughter who came home to cash in on her dying mother. Cole was the one who said we needed an attorney. I was too deep in it, too deep in grief, too deep in shock, too deep in the bizarre paralysis of being accused of something you didn't do and not having the energy to fight because you just buried your mother 5 days ago. Cole drove to Nashville and hired a lawyer named Patricia Bowen, who specialized in estate fraud and elder financial abuse. I remember sitting in Patricia's office, clutching a folder of the few documents I had, and she asked me to walk her through everything Valerie had access to. I started listing things and her face changed. Not dramatically, she was a professional, but I saw it. A tightening around the eyes. A slight pause in her note-taking. When I finished, she said, very carefully, Megan, you gave her the keys to the entire house. I know I did. I know that now. But I need you to understand the context. I was caring for a dying woman 18 hours a day. I was managing medications and doctor calls and hospice schedules and my daughter's homework and my marriage from 60 miles away. I was exhausted in a way that doesn't have a bottom, a way that makes your hands shake and your vision blur and your brain stop functioning in the places where suspicion and self-preservation live. Valerie offered to carry the one thing I couldn't carry. And I let her. Because she was my best friend. Because my mother called her my other daughter. Because in 16 years, she had never given me a single reason to doubt her. Patricia began the investigation. It took 3 months to get a clear picture, and every piece of it made me sicker. Valerie had opened a secondary account in my mother's name, with herself as co-signer, using paperwork that bore my mother's signature. Whether Mom signed it knowingly, or during one of her confused, medicated states, or whether the signature was forged entirely, we still don't know. She'd routed investment distributions into that account. She'd written herself checks for bookkeeping services totaling over $28,000. She'd made ATM withdrawals, small ones, $200 and $300 at a time, spaced over months. She'd paid off her own car. Her car. With my mother's money. The woman drove a paid-off Nissan Rogue funded by a dying school librarian's life savings, and she had the audacity to stand at that librarian's funeral and point the finger at me. The total confirmed amount was $143,600. Patricia said the actual number might be higher. Some transactions were harder to trace because Valerie had been meticulous about making them look legitimate. She's not impulsive, Patricia told me. This was planned. This was patient. She knew exactly what she was doing. Patient. Planned. Those words describe the way my best friend stole from my dying mother. The same words I would have used to describe the way she showed up with flowers. The way she remembered birthdays. The way she asked how did that interview go? And made you feel seen. It was all the same skill set. The attentiveness that made her a good friend was the same attentiveness that made her a precise and devastating thief. She paid attention to everything, and she used everything she noticed. I filed a civil suit. Patricia also referred the case to the Sumner County District Attorney's Office for criminal investigation. That process is slow, agonizingly, bureaucratically slow, and as of today, it's still ongoing. I'm told there's a strong case. I'm told the documentation is clear. I'm told these things take time. Meanwhile, Valerie is still living 3 miles from my mother's house, still attending First Baptist, still posting on Facebook, still breathing free air while I sit in a house that smells like my mother's perfume and wait for a system that moves at the speed of paperwork. The social fallout has been the cruelest part. Worse than the money, and I know how that sounds, because $143,000 is devastating. It's my mother's legacy, it's years of her life converted into dollars and then stolen. But the loneliness is worse. Because Valerie didn't just take the money. She took the town. About a third of the people in Hendersonville believe her version. They believe it because she told it first, because she told it with tears, because she told it at a funeral where emotions were high and critical thinking was low. They believe it because she's charming and specific and cries in all the right places, and because accusing a grieving daughter is such an outrageous thing to do that it loops back around to seeming credible. Who would lie about something like that at a funeral? Another third are staying out of it, the neutrals, the fence sitters, the people who hug me at the grocery store and then have dinner at Valerie's house the same week. And the last third believe me. They've seen the evidence, or they know my character, or they're just decent enough to wait for the truth before rendering judgment. But a third of a small town is a lonely number. It's enough to fill a room for a birthday party, but not enough to make you feel like you belong anywhere. Uncle Hank came around after Patricia showed him some of the documentation. He called me and said, "I'm sorry, Megan. I should have asked you before I assumed." I appreciated that. I did. But the fact that my own uncle, my father's brother, a man who carried me on his shoulders at 4th of July parades, had to be shown legal documents before he believed I didn't rob my dying mother tells you everything about what Valerie's accusation did. It shifted the burden of proof onto me. I had to prove my innocence. Not to a court, to my own family. To my own town. To people who'd known me my entire life. And some of them still aren't convinced, because evidence is complicated and stories are simple, and Valerie told a very simple story. Mom's house is still empty. I can't sell it while the legal proceedings are ongoing, and honestly, I don't know if I could even if I were allowed. I go there sometimes. Sit in the kitchen where she taught me to make biscuits. Stand in the doorway of her bedroom where the hospital bed used to be. The wallpaper is the same pattern she chose in 1994, tiny yellow flowers on cream. She never changed it because she said it reminded her of Dad. He helped me pick this pattern, she told me once. Took him 45 minutes at the hardware store. 45 minutes to choose wallpaper. That man loved keeping things right. I stand in that room and I talk to her. I tell her what happened. I tell her about Valerie, about the money, about the funeral. I tell her I'm sorry I didn't protect her better. I tell her I'm sorry I trusted the wrong person with the most important paperwork of her life. And I tell her I'm going to get it back, not just the money, but her name. Her legacy. The reputation of a woman who spent 69 years building a life of quiet integrity, only to have it tangled up in someone else's crime. I went through old photos last month. 16 years of Valerie. There she is at my wedding, adjusting my veil, grinning at the camera. There she is at Grace's first birthday, holding my daughter on her hip, frosting on both of their faces. There she is on Mom's porch, drinking iced tea, laughing at something Mom said. There she is at Thanksgiving, at Christmas, at the 4th of July, at 100 Tuesday nights where nothing special happened except two friends sitting on a couch watching bad TV and believing the world was kind. I didn't delete them. Not yet. I put them in a folder on my desktop called Evidence, not for the court case, but for myself. Evidence that it was real. Evidence that I didn't imagine 16 years of friendship. Evidence that the woman who destroyed me was, at some point, the woman who loved me. Because I need to believe both things are true. If the love was fake the whole time, then I'm a fool who wasted 16 years on a con artist. If the love was real and she did it anyway, then people are capable of things I'll never understand. Both options are terrible. But the second one is at least honest, and I've had enough dishonesty to last several lifetimes. Valerie hasn't contacted me. Not once since the funeral. No text, no call, no letter, no email. 16 years of daily communication, good morning texts, Marco Polo videos, 3-hour phone calls about nothing, and then absolute silence. Like I was a subscription she canceled. Like I was a tab she closed. The absence of her is everywhere. In the empty chair at my kitchen table. In the silence of Sunday mornings when we used to FaceTime while making breakfast. In the fact that when something happens, good or bad, my first instinct is still to tell her, and my second instinct is to remember that the person I want to tell is the person who ruined my life. Last week, I saw her. I was picking Grace up from school and Valerie was in the parking lot. She volunteers at the elementary school reading program, because of course she does, because image management is a full-time job and she's the hardest worker I've ever met. She was standing by her car, the Nissan Rogue, the one my mother's money paid off, talking to another mom, laughing. She was wearing a scarf I recognized. Blue and cream, cashmere. I gave it to her for her birthday 3 years ago. She saw me. Our eyes met across the parking lot, across 15 cars and a lifetime of broken trust. And her face did something I wasn't prepared for. It softened. Not guilt, I know what her guilt looks like, and this wasn't it. It was sadness. Real, unperformable sadness. The kind that lives in the eyes and can't be faked. For 1 second, maybe less, she looked at me the way she used to. Like I was her person. Like she missed me. And I hated her for it. Not for the money. Not for the funeral. For that look. Because that look means she knows what she lost. And she did it anyway. She calculated the cost of our friendship, weighed it against $143,000 and the thrill of getting away with it, and she chose the money. She chose it with her eyes open. She chose it knowing exactly what it would cost, not just me, but us. And the fact that she misses me doesn't make it better. It makes it worse. Because missing someone you destroyed isn't regret. It's nostalgia for the crime scene. Grace asked me last night, while I was braiding her hair for bed, "Mama, how come Auntie Val doesn't come over anymore?" I closed my eyes, took a breath, and said, "Sometimes friendships change, baby. It doesn't mean anyone's bad. It just means things are different now." She thought about it and said, "But I miss her mac and cheese." I laughed. The kind of laugh that has a crack running through it. Because Grace is 7, and she doesn't know about the money or the funeral or the parking lot or the scarf. She knows that a woman who used to come to our house and make her favorite dinner from scratch doesn't come anymore. And in the pure, uncomplicated math of a 7-year-old's heart, that's the whole tragedy. She's not wrong. My mother left a letter. Patricia found it during the estate review, tucked inside a manila folder in Mom's filing cabinet, handwritten, dated about 5 months before she died. It was addressed to me. It said, "Megan, by the time you read this, I hope I've already told you everything in person. But in case I haven't, in case this thing takes me before I get the chance, I want you to know, everything I have is yours. The house, the accounts, all of it. I wasn't good at talking about money. Your father was the same way. But I saved it for you and for Grace. Every dollar. For 30 years. Not because I didn't trust the world, but because I wanted you to have choices. I wanted you to have the kind of freedom I didn't have when your father died and I had to figure out everything alone with the little girl and no savings and no plan. You won't have to do that. I made sure of it. I love you more than any number in any account. Take care of Grace. Take care of yourself. And don't forget to water the garden. Mom." I read that letter sitting on the floor of her empty house, and I cried so hard I couldn't see the words anymore. I cried for the money she saved, one librarian paycheck at a time, for 30 years. I cried for the conversation we never had. I cried for the freedom she wanted to give me that Valerie intercepted like a package off someone else's porch. And I cried because my mother, even in death, even in a letter she wrote while dying, was still taking care of me. Still planning ahead. Still making sure I'd be okay. She made sure. And Valerie unmade it. I'm still fighting. The civil case is moving. The criminal investigation is ongoing. Patricia says we'll recover most of the money eventually, maybe not all, but most. The house will be mine. The remaining accounts will be mine. My mother's legacy will be restored, on paper at least. But the other things, the things that don't fit in a legal filing, those are gone. The funeral I should have had. The town that should have held me. The grief that should have been mine alone, uncontaminated by accusation. The 16 years of friendship that I now have to carry in a folder called evidence. The ability to trust someone the way I trusted Valerie, completely, recklessly, with a kind of faith that only exists before you learn what people are capable of. Those things are gone. And no verdict will bring them back. Greater than my mother spent 30 years saving money she never spent so that her daughter and granddaughter would have choices she never had. She packed lunches and drove the same car and wore the same earrings and watered the same garden, and she did it all so I'd be free. My best friend stole $143,000 of that. But the thing I can't forgive, the thing that wakes me up at 3 a.m. and sits on my chest like a stone, isn't the money. It's the funeral. She took my goodbye. She stood in a room full of people who loved my mother and she turned my grief into a trial. She made 60 people look at me with suspicion on the worst day of my life. And she did it to cover what she'd done. My mother's last gift to me was freedom. Valerie stole it and called me the thief. And the worst part? Some people still believe her. But my mother's letter is in my nightstand. And every night, before I sleep, I read the last line, "I love you more than any number in any account." That's the inheritance Valerie couldn't touch. And it's the only one that matters.